London, 1849. A city alive with the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, the smoke of coal fires drifting through the air, and the restless energy of a growing working-class population. Yet behind the cobbled streets and narrow alleys, there lurked darkness, hidden passions, dangerous affairs, and acts of violence that would shock Victorian society. One such act became known as the Bermondsey Horror. It was a crime of betrayal, lust, and cold-blooded murder. A scandal that involved a married couple and a secret lover, and ended in a killing so gruesome that newspapers across Britain feasted on every detail. At its heart was Maria Manning, a woman both glamorous and cunning, and her husband, Frederick George Manning, an embittered ex-railway guard. Together, they plotted the death of Maria's former lover, Patrick O'Connell, a wealthy customs officer. Their crime became infamous, not only for its brutality, but also for the public spectacle that followed, culminating in a double execution that drew one of the largest crowds London had ever seen. This is the story of the Bermondsey Horror, Victorian love triangle that ended in blood. To understand why the case captured the imagination of the public, we need to step back into Victorian London in the mid-19th century. The Industrial Revolution had transformed the city into a booming metropolis. But with that growth came poverty, overcrowding, and crime. Areas like Bermondsey, south of the Thames, were working-class neighbourhoods, bustling with markets, warehouses, and pubs. It was here, in Union Street, that the Mannings lived, and it was here that murder would strike. Victorians were both fascinated and horrified by violent crime. Newspapers had discovered that stories of murder sold more copies than almost anything else. And so, when news of the Bermondsey case broke, it became front-page sensation, complete with lurid details, courtroom drama, and moral lessons for the public. Maria Manning was born in Switzerland around 1821. Strikingly attractive and intelligent, she worked for a time as a lady's maid. She was ambitious, she craved wealth, status, and comfort. But in London, opportunities for women like Maria were limited. Marriage was often the only path to security. She eventually wed Frederick George Manning, a man of lower social standing. Frederick had worked as a railway guard, but his career prospects were poor. He was described as moody, jealous, and embittered. Yet, for Maria, he provided a husband, though not the wealth she longed for. But Maria had another man in her life, Patrick O'Connell. O'Connell was a customs officer with a reputation for dishonesty. He was also wealthy. He had accumulated significant savings. Before marrying Frederick, Maria had been O'Connell's mistress. Even after her marriage, she kept in contact with him. He lavished her with gifts, and she knew he had money to spare. To Frederick, O'Connell was a rival and an insult to his pride. To Maria, he was both an ex-lover and an opportunity. Together, Maria and Frederick hatched a deadly plan. By August 1849, the Mannings were deeply in debt. Their dreams of rising in society were crumbling, and so Maria convinced O'Connell to visit them at their house in Bermondsey for dinner. On the evening of August 9th, O'Connell arrived at the Manning home. He came carrying a black bag, rumoured to contain railway stock, certificates, and cash valuables that only increased his appeal as a target. The Mannings welcomed him in. He sat down to dinner, likely unaware that the people across the table were plotting his murder. What happened next was brutal. As O'Connell sat in his chair, Frederick Manning crept up behind him and shot him in the head. Maria then joined in the assault, striking him with a crowbar to make sure he was dead. Together, they dragged his body into the kitchen, stripped him of valuables, and buried him beneath the floor underneath the very flagstones of their own home. For several days, neighbours noticed something odd. O'Connell had not returned home, and rumours began to spread. His friends grew suspicious, especially since O'Connell was a man of routine. By August 17th, police began investigating. They searched the Mannings' house and discovered freshly disturbed soil beneath the kitchen flagstones. Digging deeper, they uncovered the decomposing body of Patrick O'Connell. It was a horrific sight. O'Connell's skull shattered, his body wrapped in rags, and his possessions gone. The discovery shocked not only the neighbourhood but the entire city. The Mannings, however, had already fled. The couple had separated after the crime. Maria fled to Edinburgh, hoping to disguise herself. Frederick went into hiding elsewhere in London, but the police were relentless. Maria was recognised in Scotland when she tried to sell some of O'Connell's property. She was arrested and brought back to London in disgrace. Frederick was also caught after attempting to pawn valuables linked to the victim. Now, the two stood accused of one of the most notorious murders of the Victorian era. The trial began in October 1849 at the Old Bailey. It immediately drew enormous crowds. Courtrooms overflowed with spectators eager to hear every detail. Newspapers published long transcripts of the testimony. The evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses described seeing O'Connor enter the Mannings' home on the night of his disappearance. Items belonging to him were found in their possession, and the body beneath their floor left little room for doubt. Maria attempted to shift the blame entirely onto Frederick. She portrayed herself as an innocent woman trapped by a violent husband. Frederick, in turn, accused Maria of masterminding the crime. The jury was unconvinced. Both were found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. On November 13, 1849, the Mannings were taken to Horsemonger Lane Jail in South London. Outside, a massive crowd gathered, estimated at 30,000 to 50,000 people. It was one of the largest public executions in British history. Among the spectators was none other than Charles Dickens, who later condemned the ghoulish excitement of the mob. In a famous letter, he described the scene as disgraceful, criticizing how executions had become a form of entertainment rather than a solemn act of justice. As the gallows were prepared, Maria Manning cut a striking figure in a black satin dress. She stood defiant, showing little emotion. Frederick looked pale and defeated. The couple was hanged side by side. For the first time in many years, a husband and wife were executed together in England. The Bermondsey Horror became more than just a crime story. It was a cultural phenomenon. Pamphlets, ballads, and illustrations were sold on the streets. Maria Manning, in particular, fascinated the public. She was portrayed as a cold, calculating woman, a modern Eve who lured men to their doom. Her black satin dress became infamous, symbolizing both her vanity and her defiance. Writers used the case as inspiration. Charles Dickens is believed to have modeled a character in Bleak House on Maria. The press used the case to stir debates about morality, crime, and the death penalty. But at its heart, the Bermondsey Horror was a simple yet tragic story. Greed, lust, and jealousy combining in a deadly cocktail that destroyed 3 lives. The murder of Patrick O'Connor by Maria and Frederick Manning was not just another Victorian crime, it was a mirror held up to a society both fascinated by and fearful of violence. It showed how the hunger for wealth and passion could spiral into murder. It revealed the public's morbid fascination with executions, and it left behind a tale that still haunts the streets of Bermondsey. This was the Bermondsey Horror, a love triangle turned murder, and a spectacle that shocked an entire nation. Thank you for watching Crimes Through Time. If this story fascinated you, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more journeys into history's darkest mysteries. And tell us in the comments, do you think Maria Manning was the true mastermind? Or was her husband equally to blame? We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, stay curious, stay safe,